Alright guys, he's back. He might be a little old, but today we're going to find out if he can still kick some serious ass in today's blind review of Terminator Genisys on 4K Blu-ray. Alright, so I went into this one completely blind. I had never got a chance to see it in the theater, and I've owned it for a few months but never got around to actually watching it yet. So I watched it last night for the first time, and this is what I think. First off, I do want to mention that I will be talking about some of the plot points, so if you haven't had a chance to see it and you don't want any spoilers, just skip right to here and bypass all that. So first things first. I really did enjoy the movie. There were certain things about it that I didn't really agree with, obviously. It's definitely not the best Terminator movie out there, but there were a lot of elements that I did enjoy. I did like in the beginning how they infiltrated the machine's headquarters, and you got to see their time displacement machine, or whatever they called it again. And you got to see how they sent the T-800 back in time for the first time as a last-ditch effort not to get destroyed, because moments after they did manage to shut down the machines. But, of course, it was too late. Arnold had already been sent back. It was interesting to see the explanation for Kyle's rough entrance into 1984 in the original movie, because they never really dabbled on it at all. In the original Terminator, Arnold, gets transported into 1984 all gracefully and stands up all big, where when Kyle gets transported to 1984, he kind of like falls out of the sky and bounces off the ground pretty hard. And, most people probably overlook that, but if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense why it happened like that. This movie actually tackles that and explains it, and it's pretty cool to see. At that point, though, it starts to get a little weird. The T-1000 shows up out of nowhere, but that's probably a little bit of foreshadowing, letting you know that the timeline isn't exactly how it was last time, because you don't see the T-1000 until 1997 or something in the Terminator world. It was kind of subtle, so you don't really pick up on it right away. You just enjoy the ride. You don't really see a big change in that timeline until the second older Arnold shows up in behind, whenever the T-800 first comes in contact with the punks to take their clothes. He shows up behind him in the shadows and is revealed, and then he opens fire and ends up killing the T-800. At that point, you realize that, the timeline has definitely changed. But then with the introduction of Sarah Connor, now in this movie, she's no longer, a helpless, frightened waitress. Now she's battle-ready Sarah Connor that you saw near the middle to end of T2. Apparently, in this timeline, Arnold ends up intercepting her whenever she's 9 years old, and basically raises her. So in this movie, she's attached to him like a father figure, whereas in 1997, she was terrified of him whenever she saw him again. So that was kind of an interesting element, but there were certain parts of it that were a little strange. Like, out of nowhere, they were able to build a time machine with technology from the 80s, but all they were missing was that one little chip. It seems strange, but for the most part, I was able to overlook it because I did like the direction that the plot was going at that time. I did enjoy the main twist where you see John Connor basically become the villain. It was an interesting way to, carry out that character arc that I didn't see coming, and I thought it was a pretty cool addition to the story. Now, I don't know why Hollywood keeps doing this, but there's a lot of things in this movie that aren't very realistic, and it kind of pulls you out of the story a little bit. Like, action scenes that are just way over the top. Like, there's a scene where they're getting into a helicopter, and it falls off the side of a building, and he starts it on its way down. It's like doing a complete nosedive, essentially down the side of a building, and then right before it hits the ground, he pulls up like it's an airplane or something. And I'm no pilot, but I'm pretty sure helicopters don't work that way. Right after that scene happens, he's kind of flying through the buildings, immediately being chased by another helicopter, and they're just weaving in and out at speeds that I don't think helicopters can do. So I don't know, I find whenever they do over-the-top action sequences like that, it's just, obviously the movie's not real, but like whenever you go over the top like that, it kind of, in my opinion, ruins some things, because in your mind as you're watching it, like you're like, this doesn't make any sense, so it kind of pulls you out. I would rather they did something a little bit more realistic. I mean, do the same scene, just don't do it so over the top. Sure, have the helicopter fall off the roof, but have them gain control within seconds instead of waiting until the last second. Have them veer through all the buildings and stuff in their scene, but do it at a slower pace. Make it a little bit more real. That was one thing that, especially in Terminator 2, there's a few helicopter scenes in that movie. You didn't see them going crazy. It was regular flying for the most part, and just lots of, action with the guns and whatnot. Another thing in the story that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me was the whole Genisys program. I don't know, maybe if they would have put a little bit more backstory as to why people would be excited for this piece of software, instead of just being like spewed this information on the screen that everybody wants a piece of this Genisys and everyone is dying for this thing to get released and being connected from every angle of the internet. With, I think they said something at one point, they had over 1 billion pre-orders. Like, that doesn't happen for anything ever. Nothing is that huge. So again, I think they just, if they would have taken the whole Genisys program and like tied it into something that was a little bit more nonchalant and just kind of snuck it into society and let it kind of form out naturally, that would have made more sense, instead of like showing that everybody's just dying for this new operating system, essentially. I found that to be, again, a little exaggerated and over the top, and didn't really make a whole lot of sense in reality. But I'm not a writer. I just think if they would make certain things in movies a little bit more believable, even though this is a sci-fi movie, if you make it a little bit more on the realistic side, it's more believable and it pulls you into the story more. AKA Terminator 2. That movie was done to perfection. Everything in that movie, everything in the story of that movie made sense. It was realistic. It was believable. And that's why I think it did so well. These past few Terminator movies that have come out have been over the top. And every time the more it goes over the top, the more it pulls you out of the movie, or out of the story, I guess. And it just makes for a bad movie. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate this movie. I did think it was good, and I did enjoy it. There's just a couple things, like I said, that I think if they would have done it a little bit differently, it would have got a better response from audiences. And even though Arnold is obviously a lot older now, the way they kind of explained that in the movie I did like, because it made sense, and it made his existence as an older man with gray hair in this movie believable. Like, why couldn't they do that with the rest of the movie? You know how he got stuck back in time because his arm was exposed and he couldn't do the time travel, and then he had to wait, what was it, 20-ish, 30 years, something like that, for them to, come back in time. So he was living a life of some sort for like 30 years, and his body did age. So it was a really clever way to incorporate his age into this movie and make him relevant. So I enjoyed that. And Arnold, even after all this time, still had an amazing appearance as a Terminator. I don't think anyone could ever top him, CG or not. He's phenomenal at playing this character, and I'm glad that they reused him again. Now, on the technical side of things, this movie was shot in 2.8 and 3.4K, and it had a 2K DI. The movie has an aspect ratio of 2:39.1, so it will have your black bars on the top and the bottom. Now, as far as the video quality of this movie, it's pretty clean. It's pretty phenomenal, to be honest. This whole movie, even with all its flaws, is definitely demo-worthy in both the video and the audio. It's a very clean, sharp transfer with little to no film grain or noise at all. So any of the grain haters out there, like myself, I'm not a big fan of grain, you will enjoy it. Now, the blacks in this movie were fantastic. They're very deep and inky, and there's a lot of shadow detail because a lot of this movie actually takes place underground or somewhere with dark scenes. So there is still a lot of detail in those shadowed areas, because of the HDR. Now, I did find that the transfer in general with the Dolby Vision in this movie to be a little bit on the dim side, except of course whenever there was some bright lights in the background, or if there was ever any fire or lasers on the screen. All of that stuff had your bright specular highlights that you would expect out of an HDR transfer, especially Dolby Vision. But for the scenes that didn't have any of that stuff, it was a little bit on the dim side. So I think I would have enjoyed it if they would have bumped it up a little bit more, but it's a small thing to gripe about. Another small complaint with this transfer, I found a lot of certain scenes to have some flat colors. They weren't super vibrant, and some of them even come across a little washed out. But overall, the movie was good. There's only a couple scenes, especially near the end, where they're in the spot where they were building that time displacement machine. Some of the stuff in the backgrounds, there's some yellows and blues and whatnot, and I found them to be a little bit flat and dull, but the majority of the movie looks great. So even with those small little flaws, I still give the video on this a solid 9 out of 10. It would have been a 10 out of 10, I guess, if it would have been a little bit brighter and a little bit more vibrant, but it's still really good. Now, where this movie really shines is in the audio. Oddly enough, you would think with a 4K Blu-ray with Dolby Vision, the standout thing would be the video, but in this one I have to give it to the audio. It's phenomenal. There's really great separation. You got some nice overhead sounds with the helicopters and the lasers and all the fighting that's going on. There's lots of particle effects, I guess you could say, with the audio. And the bass, my god, the bass is like reference quality for sure. I had to turn it down because I was watching it a little bit later at night last night, and I live in an apartment, so I had to be very careful with my subwoofer because it was put to the test last night. So for the audio on this guy, I'll give it a solid 10 out of 10. It's definitely demo and reference worthy. Alright guys, that about wraps up the review of Terminator Genisys. All in all, I enjoyed the movie. The video I thought was phenomenal. Some small little complaints, but nothing major. And the audio, nothing to complain about the audio. Everything was good. Soundtrack was fantastic as always. The effects were amazing, and you really felt like you were there. Next I'll be watching Terminator Dark Fate because I haven't seen that one either. So stay tuned for that one soon enough. That being said, I'll be back.